Let me check with Baxi, sir.
Yes, you can start.
Baxi?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, you are here. So we can start. Yeah. Okay, we are starting. So everybody is starting. So may I again welcome you in this next session. And I do not know whether I do not know whether Mr. Bakshi heard that or not, but I told him that we will take a small break before you disrupt everything.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
So we are ready. We are ready to get disrupted. And I request Dr. Chitra to take over the session.
I'm very glad to introduce Mr. Viplav Baxi. Mr. Viplav Baxi is an edtech professional and an author of a disruptive book on our educational system called What If EDU. He has over 26 years of experience in strategy, pedagogy, content, digital transformation, product design, and engineering across K-12, higher education, publishing, corporate, e-learning, vocational education, and test preparation sectors. Mr. Viplav is currently the Senior VP and Chief Product Officer at K-Nimbus, a digital knowledge platform, and has worked with Akash Education as Vice President Products, as Director Product and Digital Transformation at Oxford University Press, as Chief Product Architect at FlipLearn, as CEO at Atelier Learning System, and has held many other senior level positions in his career. He has pioneered initiatives in technology and learning in India, such as prototyping one of India's earliest learning and assessment portals in 1997 at IGNOU, the nation's largest open distance learning university, building the technology infrastructure in 2000 and 2002 for egurukul.com, India's first K-12 online learning portal, and creating a pioneering 18-month-long enabled learning 18-month-long blended learning program for the nation's premier management institute, the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade. He was also the technology architect behind the acclaimed product for English language training, which is English Edge, in 2004, created with BBC Worldwide. Apart from his work on education and technology for some of the leading education companies in India, he has been a contributor to government and industry association-led committees on technology in education for K-12, higher education, and teacher education. He has authored about 400 blog posts and articles. His book, What If EDU, focuses on possible disruptions in our education systems and poses 12 questions that compel you to rethink our systems of education. We welcome you, sir, for today's keynote address on enabling disruption.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chitra, for this honor. Dr. Kasturirangan, Dr. Kamath, my guru, Dr. M.M. Pant, who's going to be speaking in the valedictory, my guru again, Professor Ujjwala Chakradeo, Professor Sancheti's session, wonderful session that he did on ABC as well. I'm really honored to be among all of you. It's a great theme as well, NEP, and what we can do to simplify the implementation. I think NEP has given us the impetus. It has given us a framework to start envisioning the future. And it has so many different dimensions, as people have been saying, that it's completely amazing what we can do with it as we go along. I think it will be important for us to look at how to enable different parts of the NEP, many statements there that we can just enable and disrupt our education systems, not just in India, but also inspire people to do it worldwide as well that we want to do. So I'll quickly share some of the things that I found very interesting in the NEP, and let me know when you're ready, when you can see my screen. I took a few of the snippets from the NEP. I'm going to talk more about what's inside the flute. Because Sancheti said there's a flute with a lot of holes in it, a lot of exit and entry points that you can go to. But I'm going to talk about that funnel, that flute itself, our teaching and learning. and how that can be disrupted, how we can enable disruption at the level of the classroom, at the level of the individual transaction with the student. And that's my focus of my talk today on disruption. And if you look at it, there are multiple things that the NEP says today. It says, for example, that curriculum content will be reduced in each subject, making space for inquiry-based learning, holistic learning, and so on and so forth. There'll be a lot of experiential learning that will be also included in the curriculum, in the way we teach, whether it's school or it is higher education. And we'll integrate a lot of these subject areas. We'll break down the barriers between the different subject areas, make it more integrated in nature. Change our assessments from rote and memorization based to more regular formative assessments, more experiential assessments, testing higher order skills as well. Although the some of the recent announcements around the common entrance test for universities goes against that, but I think long term we will end up with much better ways of assessment for higher order skills as well. Most importantly, US teachers will be given more autonomy in choosing what you can do and what you cannot do. So I think the entire implementation, while there is a lot of thinking around how degrees will be formulated, what will be entry exit points, how will we create research funds, and how will we do governing bodies of universities. I think the most important piece is how we will transact teaching and learning. And while the other things may be disruptive, I want that teaching and learning itself be thought in different ways now, and that's the focus of my discussion today. Also, a lot of a lot of focus has been given on technology, and through my talk, I'll talk about how education and technology, in terms of education and technology, are not separate things, but they're integrated. So what is this disruption going to be? What is it that we're talking about at this particular point in the context of the classroom, in the context of the NEP? And to do that, I want to take you back memory lanes, because I've spent 3 decades in the industry, and so I would like to just recall what happened in 3 decades that I've been working in EdTech. In the first decade in the 1990s, when I was just finishing up my master's in economics, we looked at so many disruptions happening. Hotmail came out, the first Internet Explorer, Windows 95 combination came out. Netflix was started in late 90s. Google, Yahoo came up. There was the floppy drive at that time. Linux was born at that time, and a decade of huge activity. And in that decade, I was working on hypermedia systems. For example, the World Wide Web that you see right now, I used to create software to create learning content which was hyperlinked. I worked in hardware simulations. I worked in online learning at that time. I was building an IAS preparation site. I did my first online coding site in 1998, 99, where students could come in and actually code in JavaScript and what was then earlier ASP and so on and so forth. Also worked with Professor Pant to demonstrate what an online university could look like. So what a virtual university could look like in 97. Also was very interested in working in online assessments at that time, software simulations and things like that. And I worked through, a variety of industries through that time in the 90s. And so a lot of this disruption, which was happening around in the world, and the kind of things that I was doing were quite closely related in terms of both technology and pedagogy. In the next decade, MIT OCW became very popular. Facebook was born. So was LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, and the explosion of Web 2.0 happened. So it was a huge disruption for all of us. From just a consume-only or read-only web, it became a read-write web. We were able to write to it. We were able to communicate with people. It became a two-way medium for us for the first time. And at that time, I was working in things like virtual labs, simulation series games, online tutoring, Second Life as a virtual reality platform, building bespoke content for digital learning. And most importantly, I was part of the first MOOC in 2008, which is now called a CMOOC, versus the later ones that came with Coursera, Udemy, etc., being called XMOOCs. So I had the opportunity to look at a lot of cutting edge technology happening at that time, and how that technology could really be thought of as integral to the education system. In the next decade, of course, you saw mushrooming of online education players. You saw Coursera, edX, Udemy, Byju's, Vedantu, TikTok came in as a media network, Instagram, adaptive learning with Newton, online learning with Edmodo, Google Apps for education, hardware improvements like Chromebook, wearables, 3D printers, robotics, RPA, IoT. So many different things happened in the last decade. It was amazing. It just exploded with the advent of cloud computing and many other technologies. It just exploded. And while this was happening, I was working on smart classrooms. I was working on, Xbox Connect, augmented textbooks, flipped learning, simulations, etc. And a lot of work around teams and classroom enablement into this thing across various industries. I worked K-12, higher education, publishing. So seen a lot of disruption happening, and try to translate some of these disruptive things within the education system as well. And come to the real understanding that, if you want to really leverage disruption that's happening around us as well in the education system, there's a specific way of doing that. And now in this decades, I'm working, of course, on things like AI, digital libraries with Nimbus, which is a fantastic digital ecosystem, and the metaverse, which I think is going to really play a big role. And I think the NEP also, in some ways, talks about artificial intelligence as well as virtual reality in big ways, as well as adaptive learning. And this journey of mine has shown me a lot of different types of disruptions and thoughts around disruptions. One of the things is, as Peter said, dismantling of long-standing practices in order to make way for innovation. So if there's a practice that's happening, some innovation happens that really breaks the glass ceiling. It creates a completely new way of doing things, which is more acceptable and easier to adopt and so on and so forth. That's creative destruction from, as Peter defined it. Andrew Grove from Intel defined disruption as something that results from a 10x change in the power of competitors or complementers, customers or suppliers. So what is that disruption happening around the education system that is promoting that kind of a change within the education system or forcing it as part of the ecosystem to change? And Jacoby says, how can something transform from being complicated, exclusive, expensive to being simple, accessible and affordable? And that's what is defined as disruption. Larry Page from Google says disruption is the mindset that we should be 10 times better rather than 10% better. So how are we imagining ourselves? How are we imagining incremental change or a disruptive change? Christensen also says things that there must be a technology enabler that makes innovation available to people previously not served by the sector, marketing industry and sector as parallels. And secondly, the business model or the education model must change. I think we should be careful in saying, applying terms of business to terms of education. And I'm sensitive about that. So not the business model, but the education model, how it must change, or the way of transacting learning must change. So when there's something that's an incremental innovation, what point do we consider it to be a disruptive innovation? And Christensen makes the point that mostly every innovation, disruptive or not, begins as a very small scale experiment. Try and do something, and then complete substitution, if it comes at all, may take decades. This is a really important piece. I heard once that in one of my discussions with some senior people, that textbooks take 7 years to get to the last student. I mean, to really get updated across, because there is already stock in the market, the logistics changes, challenges to get new textbooks ready and shipped out and so on and so forth. So maybe technology is disrupting that, but how is that happening? Complete substitution will take time. It is a mindset. That is what disruption is all about. And that mindset is something that we need to worry about very heavily. I define disruption as when we irrevocably change doing something, when we move from one way of doing things to another way of doing things. And it's not just like this pre-COVID, post-COVID kind of a thing. Like Pre-COVID, we were classroom heavy. Physical interaction was a dominant mode of working. In COVID, we had to do a lot of things, adopt online as a fast way of doing things. Post-COVID, are we going back to the physical classroom or the old ways of doing things? So what is lasting, what is enduring change is, I think, what my definition of disruption is. And education, I can see the change is happening rapidly. The NEP is talking about a great number of things. There are so much happening in terms of fungibility of credits, for example, or options that are coming up for professional learning. Even in corporate education, there's so much change that is happening very, very fast. Companies are becoming unicorns and decacorns now. But is that lasting change? Is that really a disruption? And that we have to really understand that. And when we are talking about disruption, we want to talk about what are the enabling levers. What are these things that can enable us to actually change and disrupt the way of doing things that we are doing right now? And equally important is the question: what is it that we do that we should change? It's not just that we should change, and change is not for just anything. It's for the sake of changing, or just because the NEP says we should change. But what is it that we do that we should change irrevocably is one very important question. What is that 10x disruption? What is the change that will have a domino effect on the rest of the system? We make one small change in one part of the system. How will it change everything else in the system? How will we service that? What is the priority we'll give to it? If ABC is that disruption, then what will happen? It will mean that teachers may have to become multi-skilled, or that classrooms may have to become more segmented or amorphous, to understand or extensible. We'll have to create a lot of different things in the system to support something like an ABC, for example. And what is that something? That something fundamental is something that has the potential to be adopted easily and at scale. It's something that is accessible, it's affordable, it is something timely. So you can sometimes be early, or you could be too late. Sometimes it's the right timing. And I've witnessed myself that sometimes I've been too early getting to market with a new idea, and it's something that's gained credence maybe 15 years later. So it's also a question of what, the timing of the entire disruption itself. It should be something novel. So we should make sure that what we are doing here is we are just not repeating, like Sisyphus, what we used to do earlier, just old wine in new bottles kind of a thing. So we are saying, let's do experiential learning, but we had a lot of experiential learning earlier. We had Vigyan Prasar. We had this beautiful experiential videos, even now online available for us. There's a huge wealth of information in Gyanvani or Ignoo's materials and so on and so forth, which are very experiential in nature, very constructive, very collaborative in nature. But how are we using those strategies in the new age? Are we just repackaging them and saying, okay, they were offline lectures, now we're going to online lectures? Or are we doing something completely new? So the novelty of that something has to be understood. It has to be something realistic, not like Icarus, who just weren't flying very close to the sun. We want to make sure that we make realistic decisions about what we can disrupt, or work in a realistic manner. And of course, something human. Sometimes you think you're the God challenge. Technology will be the disruption. Technology will change everything. This is what will transform humanity and our education system. So we have to also give humans and humanity the precedence here as well. Very importantly, something integrated, that education technology is not just education and not just technology. It is uniquely edtech. It's a combination, it's a merger, it's something integrated. You can't think about it one thing imposed on the other, or it's just a completely integrated system. And of course, in our country, the size and scale of India, with so many universities, colleges, so many subjects, disciplines, such a vast area to be covered, so many students and teachers, there can't be a one-size-fits-all solution. So disruption may happen in pockets, in segments, but may not necessarily happen in one wide swath. one wide change. So we have to think about disruption in that sense as well. Each one of you is a disruptor. Each one of you has the potential to disrupt or change the way things that at a personal level you do, and that your department does, or your college does, or how your students learn. You have that control, and you should exercise that at your local level as well. So what is fundamental to our education system? I wanted to think about, in my book, What If We Do, I wanted to think about what are the various things that are fundamental to our education system, and how can our education system be really challenged or changed in many ways. And in that effort, I came across 2-3 important areas. Firstly, how do we organize ourselves and the systems that we work in? And in this, I looked at a few very important things. How do we organize knowledge, which is how do we break the barriers between subjects, integrate them, like the NEP is talking about. Very importantly, time. How do we handle time? And I'll go into a bit of detail around time itself, but educational time is a really important concept. It's not just the time that we spend as teachers, but also the time that we spend as students in the system. And what is it that we use our time for is an important piece. Groups. How do we create sections, batches? How do we create divisions between students, and are those divisions porous? That is an extremely important piece that I think is very important for us to look at. I looked at that in much detail in the book as well. And ownership. How are today institutions, how are they owned, and are there other ways of owning institutions? Like, could teachers own institutions, or could parents own institutions? How would that work? How would that shared ownership work? Is also a very interesting piece of what I tried to analyze. The second thing was how we actually negotiate teaching and learning, and this is the crux. Okay, so we have talked about credentialing on a macro terms like degrees and credits and so on and so forth. But is there credentialing within the classroom, within the term, within the course, within that particular week that you're teaching, or for that particular group of students that you're doing? What are other micro credentials that we can start using to encourage learning and so on and so forth? What are different ways of assessments? We've been thinking of this death by multiple choice questions, but what are other ways of actually assessing people? And it gets very difficult. Moment you start going beyond the multiple choice, multiple select kind of question, it starts getting more and more difficult how to, the kind of tools or the kind of assessment types, especially online, that you start building. There are a lot of difficulties in building those kind of advanced tools. Simulations, games can give you a lot of help in that area when you're talking about these kind of skills. Our concept of mastery, and mastery is personal, to the individual, to the student. How do we figure out mastery, and what are the personalized paths towards mastery is a very important piece. We looked at lived experience, which is experiential learning. How do we actually embed real life applications or the real life within our curriculum? It's not easy. It's absolutely not easy. I've seen examples which are very interesting and which can be done at scale and as well as an individual level. So it's possible to do, but it's something that we need to focus on and bring the entire weight of technology to bear upon us for. Similarly, research, and how do we actually encourage research at each level, at the level of the student? How do we encourage research skills is a very important piece that we need to work on. And engagement. I looked at humor as an instructional tool and found that there was a lot of evidence that humor builds trust, and talk about that also. And lastly, how do we embed change as part of DNA? And embedding change means that once we start thinking in a particular way, we continue to innovate thinking in that way. We embed that change as part of our DNA. We don't rest. We don't stop once we adopted something. We don't accept something that is imposed without thinking. We take it, we internalize it, and how we keep on changing or customizing ourselves. And therefore, what are those processes that help us collaborate, change, continuously reinforce that disruption? So enabling disruption is the work of every individual who is part of the disruption as well. Okay, it's not that a new technology or a new way of teaching came about and we blindly accepted and ran it, or because we didn't believe it, we didn't understand very well. But we have to believe it. We have to imbibe it, we have to imbibe that change, and then we have to change continuously as part of our lives. So these are three things that I thought were really important. And look at time, rethinking time, for example. Now, today, what we do is when we design the curriculum, we look at knowledge needs. It could be the course needs. We are doing a course on artificial intelligence or in economics. We look at knowledge needs. We look at the available time. So we have 180 days to do, or 60 days working days to work on this. We've got 4 hours per day. Now let's look at what is the total amount of time we have to actually available in terms of lecture time or assessment time or lab time or question time, quizzes time, exams, etc. And then we design a complete timetable. So we go linearly like this. And if you look at the school system, for example, and you could do it for the college system as well, or extend there. If you look at 14 years, 5 hours a day, 180 working days a year, that amounts to about 12,000 hours, right? So we are spending 12,000 hours across 14 years of our lives in school. And even people like Malcolm Gladwell said, if you spend 10,000 hours at anything, you'll become an expert. So are we becoming experts at, I mean, this is a little bit of a gross language here, but can we become experts at something at the end of the school term is what we are really interested in asking ourselves. And instead of thinking about that sequential approach of knowledge and available time, then timetabling or calendaring or scheduling, what if we take the scheduling to become, or the personalization of the calendar of time to become as per the student and the student's own needs, as well as the knowledge needs and the available time? So what if every child had their own calendar? Could we fit that? Not just choices of subjects, but also how each student is able to negotiate the curriculum. Some students may take more time, some students may take less time, some students may want to extend their time involved in studying a particular subject. How do we actually rethink time? How do we actually rethink how students are spending time and where they're spending time? And that's a very important piece of what we don't do. Joseph Carroll, for example, in the US, figured that students who spend 4 hours a day on a course in chemistry or math, this was an experiment in the US schools, 5 days a week for 6 weeks, a total of 120 hours, they learned just as well as students who were taught that course in 180 50-minute sessions throughout the year, total of 150 hours. So he figured that I could actually do macro schedule. I could take a bunch of subjects. I could do maths in July, English in August, a seminar in September, social science in November, and I could actually get pretty much the same outcomes, if not better, by doing some combination. I'm not saying exactly this, but some combination of that, of these courses, spent focused in time by the teacher and the students together, spending focused time on something seemed to be very important. And he found that there were many benefits. Teachers would be dealing with a smaller number of students over larger periods. There would be less fragmentation of students' attention. There would be less chaos between classes, more time for activities than just pure lecture time, greater one-on-one attention because the teacher would be handling a lesser number of students, a lot of reduced administrative overheads like record keeping, and also team teaching possible, and better utilization of staff resources also. So how we think about time is an extremely important thing. We sometimes take it for granted that the timetable given is the timetable that will be followed forever. We don't question that timetable. We make adjustments to it, but we don't question that timetable or that thinking. If in school education, CBSE says, okay, we got to spend 5 to 6 hours or sessions a week on science, then we do that. That's how the timetable is created. But we need to rethink how this time, these 12,000 hours, these 15,000 hours are actually being used, and how we can make that more efficient. Similarly, grouping. Today we have multiple types of criteria by which we absorb students and then group them in our courses. So it could be the catchment age, ability, influence, status, the need, the proximity of the student to that particular educational institution, the type of school that is there, age-wise grouping. There was a very interesting study by Malcolm Gladwell in Outliers, where he looked at the Canadian hockey team, and he's found that since they had a cutoff date for age, like we have in educational institutions, there were some students in the class who were much older than the other students, and therefore they had a better physical development, and therefore they could participate better in sports. Now, the decisions for us to what is the cutoff date for age in the school education or the college education system also makes a huge difference. These small things will really go a long way in disrupting and enabling disruption if you're able to rethink how we actually group students. And group design can be based on various parameters, but what I'm looking for is, can groups be actually constructed according to learning styles, or as well as Sancheti was saying, according to teacher fit? Can the students and teachers be fitted together so that they match the same wavelength? What if you don't find the same? Where can you get more? Where can you find groups like that? Can you substitute it by peer fitting or peers selection in terms of grouping and student choices and maybe even common classes? So what are ways in which we can rethink the grouping of students is also a very important piece. When we break down students into various groups, we are essentially putting them into silos. So there's, two different teachers teaching two different groups, two different styles. Maybe that there's a student in the first group that would have benefited from being there in the second group, but he has no choice. So how do we look at grouping and how can we make it more fungible is an important piece. In terms of pedagogy, flipped learning, you've seen homework into classroom as classwork as one flip that you can give your actual reading materials to the students to do at home, but when they come into class, they actually practice and they actually engage in conversation, solve problems, apply techniques to bring solutions, etc. But there are many other flips that you can think about. One is students into teachers. So how do students also become co-creators in the teaching process? Classwork can also be converted into learning by self or through the network of people that you have, guided or unguided. Architecturally, hallways and social spaces could become classrooms as well, as happened in many different institutions abroad. Curriculum from closed to open, from degrees to individual badges, the small things that you give during the course. Fixed learning periods, as I said, to flexible learning time anywhere, and students into collaborators. Many different flips that we can think in terms of pedagogy as well. And when we talk about personalization and mastery, we are talking about a move from teaching to the middle, because as a teacher, you'll have students at all different styles, all different types, and using the textbooks that you have or the reading list that you have, you will try and address the largest possible number of students in that particular way. But it's not possible to capture everybody's learning style or everybody's learning difficulties or challenges, and therefore you end up teaching largely to the middle. Okay, very few times you'll have the opportunity to actually really go and work one-on-one with every child every student in the classroom. And therefore, how can actually personalized learning paths start happening? How can you make each student go through a particular learning path, and it makes it and make it easy for you to actually manage those learning paths as well. And that's where technology can also really help in a big way. But a lot of good teaching techniques or organization techniques also can really help there. And then how do we rethink engagement? There are so many different disruptions that are happening in the use of gamification, serious games, in simulations, that we are simply, we may not be very aware of at this point, but we should start looking at in detail. Virtual reality, for example, I've been looking at medical VR simulations and looking at how anatomy can be explored, and working with a system with 15 different bodily systems that can be explored by students, taken apart, put together, collaborated upon in a multiplayer kind of a model. Virtual worlds where learning comes alive, and how we can actually make these things available. I would love to see investment in the NEP or projects in the NEP which work on, for example, creating devices, or these 3D devices which are headsets which are much cheaper and which can be given to every educational institution. I would like to see content development in the NEP being given some focus, so that these simulations can be made for the Indian context and built like that as well. But serious games, gamification, simulations are really very disruptive. pedagogical devices supported by technology. And I think this is one time with the NEP talking about holistic learning, talking about critical thinking skills, that we have no other option but to move from the multiple choice question paradigm to something like this. These environments can enable you to exhibit those complex behaviors. And I don't think there is any other way of looking at assessment than looking at some of these things in place. On a lighter note, was researching humor in the classroom, found that there was actual serious research on humor. So we found that laughter increases student engagement and has a positive effect on learning outcomes. Why? Because essentially, by using humor, you are able to build trust. You're able to break down barriers. And interestingly, we're talking about education, techniques, pedagogy, this, that, and technology. But something as simple as laughter in the classroom can have a disruptive effect on our educational system. It was found that there's actually a theory called instructional humor processing theory. They talked about good types of humor, bad types of humor in the classroom, and what we could do, and what its impact was on learning outcomes. And they found that something called a humor orientation index was when it was high in both the student and teacher, that's when the greatest learning happened. So to find the incongruity, to find the humor in learning is an extremely important tool or device that could be disruptive. And another thing that could be completely disruptive is to look at various roles of teachers. So from teachers, as we talked yesterday with Dr. Kamath as well, can we have teachers who have got differentiated career profiles? So you are teaching for sure. You could be a teacher, you could be a researcher as in the current thing, or you could be an administrator. But you could also be something like a chief data scientist for an institution, or a head of adaptive learning, somebody who manages the learning for, say, thousands of students in the organization, and looks at patterns, looks at data, and tries to make sense of how career outcomes or learning outcomes could become better. Head of makerspaces, somebody could be who heads experimentation, who heads labs at the entire organization, not just engineering labs or medical labs, but also social science labs, and art labs, and so on and so forth, where people can get together and make things truly interdisciplinary kind of intersection of doing and making. It could be somebody who's specialized totally in talking about data and privacy. How in the increasingly social open world, how does data privacy happen? That could be a very important piece. There could be a chief humor officer. There could be somebody who works with devices and Internet of Things, or other kind of technologies, or other kind of pedagogical practices as well. And these could be careers that could be actually looked at. And I think we should reinterpret the role of teaching, not just shifting to the online medium, but also embracing other kind of newer learning theories, newer learning and digital spaces, and so on and so forth. So I think this should be an important focus point for the NEP, to look at how new and diverse types of career profiles and options are created for teachers. Research has also shown that for teachers to learn, if there are networks of professional development, if teachers are learning together, whether within an institution or across institutions, the learning outcomes are positively impacted by this collaboration. So what it means is, if we can build at our level, at the teacher's level, if we can build a lot of collaboration, a lot of crosstalk, this can be an enabling, this can enable disruption to happen at a large scale. Think about it, if suppose there's a new thing that one of you found that works for a particular type of student, and there are obviously going to be hundreds of students like that across various universities or colleges, and if you are able to publish your research or share your experience with people, make it discoverable to them, and they benefited from it, it could cause a ripple effect. So don't undervalue the value of networks in professional development and in creating enduring change. And of course, if you do this, then your student outcomes will be positively impacted as well. And then really the most important piece of the presentation today, and I'll almost conclude with this, is rethinking digital pedagogy or andragogy or utagogy. I wanted to question what is natively edtech versus what we are doing today. And by natively edtech, I mean, what can you not do in teaching if you do not have the technology? So something that is so deeply integrated with teaching that teaching can only happen, or teaching and learning can only happen if you have the technology built in with it. What are those examples? And as we go, instead of just replicating what we have followed in the classroom exercise, can we actually natively utilize the digital medium to do education? And some of the examples: data, anything that involves capturing, describing, inferring from data on even the classroom scale, forget about the institutional scale or the national scale, anything that helps you analyze data or capture data properly, and then give you actionable insights on what you can do, recommendations on what you can do, you as a teacher, you as a student. For example, as a teacher, you could be clustering students based on patterns across courses, finding a particular problem, defining it to students, using learning analytics to do that. For example, in one case, in one university, they found, it was actually University of Purdue, they had created a project called Learning Signals. So they were able to define at-risk students by just looking at the patterns of data. And in another instance, they found the students who had not taken a particular class in grade 8 or done something in grade 8 properly, that competency was not developed, and therefore when they were in their BA final year, they weren't able to get good marks because of that particular gap continuing through the ages. So data can tell you a lot, embrace it, and that can be also disruptive for us. Remote experimentation, anything that involves collection of experimental data at scale. Today, IoTs there are billions of devices around the world, and I've seen examples where students can get access to real-time data to actually work on in their projects. So it's not just that you are taking data from 10-year old publication and saying same data will be used every day. No, this could be streaming live data coming from devices, coming from real feeds across the world. In that sense, the world is your lab, and how to create that world lab is also a natively edtech kind of a thing. Anything that involves networks, anything that involves creating connections between people. I saw this course in 2004, 2005, run by a Canadian Professor Alec Koros. And what he did was he invited his network meaning people that professionally were connected with him on LinkedIn or other places, to come in and look at and interact with his class, which meant basically that he was exposing his class to his network. And vice versa. And if you are able to do that, what is your network? What is the value that you bring to students, and how do you make them practitioners rather than just knowledge gainers is a really important piece. And of course, I talked about simulation. Anything that is real life or lifelike replication of a real world phenomenon. It's safe to fail learning. It's okay to make mistakes. There are no real world consequences, but you gain practice, you gain strength, and that is also natively edtech, right? So number one problem today I wanted to address in conclusion was about how we are still trying to emulate the physical classrooms and practices online, and how we should shift on to the next. So let's enable disruption. If we can just find the right disruptors, right enablers at your level, at level of the individual, at the level of the classroom, in consultation with your colleagues, with students, and with experts, and enable these disruptions to last, then we'll actually see change happening in the system. The rest is all necessary, but the change lies with you, and that's my fundamental request to you to help enable that disruption. Thank you. Any questions or any thoughts?
So are you writing your questions in the chat? We will give some 2 minutes to type questions. And Dr. Chitra, would you be able to read out?
Yes, I can. If they type out questions, I'll be able to read them out.
Our teachers
Or can
always
Uh,
Yeah. Our teachers always, yeah, you can even unmute, huh? You can unmute and say.
And I'm available later on as well. You can always write to me or reach out to me on the network, and love to answer your questions later as well.
Our Dr. Mumbai University distance education friend, Mr. Mandar Bhanushi, is saying that your every slide is a complete workshop. So as
you actually you need to give time for people to think on, because so many good things you have shared, and these are ideas which teachers need to take it forward, and really we have to work on each of those slide and discuss in detail. It is going to change the entire scenario. So I am very happy with this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. No, this is really important, because this is where I want to start the dialogue, spark the dialogue, because the change, it resides with you. It doesn't reside with the policymaker. It doesn't reside with institutional administration. It resides with you and the students. And that's the part that I want to really focus on.
There is one question. I'll read out the question. How the students and the teachers in remote areas or lacking infrastructure will be benefited by disruptive technologies?
So by definition, technology will be can only be applicable where it is. But good teaching practices, experiential teaching practices, can be done without technology as well. So I heard many years back the story of a teacher in a remote school in Bihar, and what she did was she went to the school, yard, and she dug up the entire yard, and she put some old statues, and she put some old things of what could have been at the past, and she covered it all up. Then she took her students there and said, go and dig, and you find these things and tell me what these things are. So something like that, even without technology, if technology is not the barrier, the barrier is not technology, the barrier is your imagination. And that imagination, if you can take forward, will enable disruption anywhere, with or without technology, with or without devices, without having the light to read. What you do, how you inspire the children, how you make them laugh, for example, is independent of technology in many ways. But when technology is to be used, let us not use it as a duplication. Let's not try to just take whatever exists in classroom, this quiz at this end, multiple choice. Let's not be constrained by our platform. Let's go beyond that and think about disruption. Only then will the vision of the NEP be satisfied at all levels.
Yeah, there are other questions also, but I think in the explanation that you gave in this question has answered those questions already.
Yeah, we often think about education and technology separately. So we think that, technology will come in, but we don't have the infrastructure. How will we do this? But it's not about that. It's more about, even if
were there,
sorry, somebody had a question?
Yeah, just one question. Will this disruptive technologies change the entire concept of educational technology, or I will not say it's limiting, but nowadays I see that educational technology, even at national level and at policy levels, equated to technology in education. And we educational technologists keep on saying that no, it's technology of education. So what would be impact of the entire umbrella of educational technology? We cannot go in today. We need to be or need to integrate all types of technologies in our day-to-day or mainstreaming technology, I would say. But that should not have the notion that if you use technology, then done. And somewhere educational technology principles should not be affected. For example, as we talk about Swayam videos. So only because you are using videos, that does not mean that you are using sound pedagogy. So what would be impact there, or what precaution can we take in this? technology.
one of my complaints through the years. I think the government has done a phenomenal job with NPTEL, with EPG Pathshala, with NME ICT, with the kind of work they've done for SWAYAM. I think it's creditable. I think no other government at that scale has operated ever in the education technology field, and hats off. This is probably the most impactful thing that has been done for Indian education, and very well planned and very well executed as well. But I think we have tried to just supplant the classroom practices to the to the digital, and we've been doing that for the past 16-17 years since NPTEL was formed. And we don't understand when we talk about a MOOC or interaction in MOOCs or the use of data, that we are not enabling our teachers to, with the right kind of platforms, to start thinking that way. We are imposing certain platforms on them with a certain defined pedagogy, which is restrictive. I heard in that session yesterday also how restricted it was to work with some of these technologies. So I think teachers have the first right to say, I want this. So long as teachers say that, okay, I will accept SWAYAM, or I'll accept NPTEL or a video-based lecture mechanism, or this pedagogy or that pedagogy as my default pedagogy. Till the time that they will not understand, we will not understand how technology can really be used in teaching. Till that time, technology will always be an add-on. It will never become an integrated part of what we are trying to do. So I think of it natively. Think of how technology is inseparable from education itself, not an add-on to it. That distinction has to be broken completely. Then it won't be an imposition. Then people won't think that, okay, I have to use technology, so let me go online. Oh, what pain it is to actually learn Moodle. It's so difficult. That barrier will go away because it will be internal, that this is how I want to teach in a digital world. And that mindset is what is the enabling disruption that we have to get. You're on mute, Darshan.
Yeah, true. No, I'm just nodding, so I did not want to talk and stuff. Yes, but true. Resignation and roles college. There's a comment of Dr. Andrea regarding CAS PBS based teacher evaluation. I think that is some different deviated area, Dr. Andrea, because if we start discussion on that, then other important questions of disruptive technologies will be ignored. But I think now even the system evaluation system is taking care of integrating technologies in day-to-day teaching. But let us not.
Maybe in a way, the government needs to figure a way of figuring this out automatically, of being able to see and figure out what the social academic technology use is by looking at the systems that they employ. So it's part of a bigger thing, and as I think the roles have to be defined by the system, but you have to demand those roles. So you have to say, okay, I want to be a chief assessment officer of the college, or I want to specialize specifically in adaptive learning technologies, and I want a post in SNDT which is only talking about adaptive learning and becomes a that kind of a post for the entire college and for all the colleges under SNDT. So I think that focus specifically with this entire change, the important thing I'm saying is NEP gives you a framework, but the change lies within you. If you make that change, if you decide to interpret the education technology in the right way, if you decide to actually make a change in your institution, it is you who will make that change, not the NEP. So you go forward and tell your vice chancellors that we want a post of chief humor officer on a lighter note, but you need to make that disruption, that the biggest enabling disruption is you, not the technology, not the education pedagogy or andragogy or whatever. It is you, and you should take that agency forward in your institutions.
Yes, Chitra, we can proceed.
Yeah. So this was a session, amazing session, full of new ideas and so many new perspectives. And I would say it's a new connotation to the word disruption also. So very positive connotation to the word disruption. So it's very nice and very enlightening. And I hope that all the teachers who have attended this workshop are able to at least incorporate one or two ideas that you have posed in this session into their day-to-day teaching learning, and bring in disruption into their daily lives that they will be doing now. So thank you
That will
so
be my
much.
reward. That will be my reward. If even one of you takes forward something, I'll be very happy. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Viplav Baxi. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. So participants, we close this keynote here. This is the second keynote, and I think since morning we have really not got tired of listening to these stalwarts. It's really fortunate to have these stalwarts in this conference, that you are not getting tired and exhausted, but continuously having some new innovative ideas, thoughts. So what we can do is we take a break, and we have given you a little bigger break because it is Sunday. So you can have a leisure lunch, but come back at 2 p.m. in your respective groups. All links are posted by now in your respective WhatsApp group. If you do not find your own group, then please post in your yesterday's group at least that I am not finding my group, or I am not added in my today's group. So I don't think there is going to be much problem today. Yesterday there was a little technical problem because many emails were spammed, and this is surprising, but all our emails were getting spammed in some participants' inbox. I assume that today you all are comfortable and you all know very well that 2 to 3:30 you have workshop link. That workshop link is added in your respective group, that is WS7 or WS8, WS9, WS9. And after that, after the workshop at 3:45, please come to Keynote. Again here using the same Zoom link, because that is again going to be an amazing experience to hear Professor M.M. Pant. Whoever have heard him, I do not need to tell them that come back. So please come back for valedictory, and then we will close. So great. Thank you very much.